Happy Soil Saturday, and spring has officially sprung. Today, you're gonna come with me as we pitter-patter our way through the garden with 7 April gardening tasks. And to get started, let's go ahead and pot up the tomatoes. And as we can see, they are looking a little bit stressed. They actually got a little bit burnt by the grow light inside by just growing too tall too quickly. But I wanted to film them for this video, so I'm gonna get them potted up and they're gonna bounce back super quickly. Alrighty, so those are now into happier homes there. They're gonna absolutely take off from here. I got no worries about that whatsoever. So stay tuned for an update on the tomatoes in about 2 weeks. Next up, let's get the dahlias started. Alrighty, now for some background context on the dahlias here, I've actually already started quite a few of them inside. I did that to test out whether or not they would start growing for me because it's my first time saving dahlia tubers over the winter. And the second piece was to test out my indoor seed starting station. And all of those have totally taken off, and so I'm gonna need to figure out what to do with them pretty quickly here. But for today, let's get the rest of these dahlia tubers started. Alrighty, so last seeds that we're gonna be starting today are our peas and beans. Let's get to it. now while we're in here, before we go to transplant the onions, I just want to show you how everything else is doing real quickly. The tomatoes and kale that we started a couple weeks ago, as you can see, really happy. Looking like they need a little bit of water, so I'll do that later today. And then the basil that we started, it's also looking really happy in here. Tons and tons of germination, so I'll have to thin those out over the course of the coming month. All the peppers that I started are doing super well, really happy, thrilled with where they're at. And lastly, here are the dahlias that I mentioned. I've already had to prune them multiple times. I'm gonna have to pot them up ASAP. The good news though is obviously they have survived the winter and are growing well. Alrighty, let's get those onions transplanted. So fun fact, one of the most challenging parts about gardening content and filming is that during the daytime, my house makes this huge shade sail across my backyard, making it really difficult to see anything that I'm filming. So I've popped this big tent over top of where we are for these onions, and then we'll take it down afterwards, but hoping that it'll make it a little bit easier for you to see what we're doing here. Now, speaking of that, let's get these onions transplanted. And the first thing that I'm going to do is put down 1 inch of fresh compost across the bed. And this transplanting process that I'm going to walk you through right now is effectively what I do for every single plant that I put into the garden. So I keep it very similar regardless of the plant. Now, once I've got the compost spread across there, I'm then going to add about 1 tablespoon of 4-4-4 organic fertilizer across the entirety of the bed. For larger plants, I would put this directly into the transplant hole, but because onions are really small and we're gonna be planting so many of them in this bed, I'm just gonna kind of broadcast it across this bed and then scratch it into that top 1 inch of compost. That's ensuring that this bed has all the nutrients that it needs in order for our onion babies to thrive. Now next, I'm going to grab my spacing tile and I'm going to space out 5 onions per square foot. And what I love about this tile is that every single time it's going to come out perfectly spaced. All that you have to do is just flip it over and then add in the next holes. And by the time that you finish the entirety of the bed, you'll see every hole is perfectly evenly spaced. Now, the last thing that I do before popping my onions into the garden is I simply add just a little sprinkle of worm castings into each one of the transplant holes. Between the compost, the organic fertilizer, and now the worm castings, these onions are going to have all the nutrients and microbial life that they need to absolutely thrive. And if you want to use them in your garden, then I'd recommend checking out the transplant kit in the description of the video. It has the exact worm castings and organic fertilizer that I use in all my videos, and more than 75 5-star reviews from happy customers. So head to the link in the description to grab yours for the season. And now lastly, all that I'm going to do is pop my onions into the transplant holes. And now I did buy all of these onions as seedlings from my local nursery. Each one of these trays is only $2.99, so it's super economical. And because I start so many other seeds, I'm totally fine just deferring to the nursery for my onions. And last year I had absolutely amazing success with them, so I'm really excited to be utilizing their seedlings again this year. Alrighty, I'm not gonna lie, I'm super stoked about how this bed is looking and can't wait to see how these onions do this season. So definitely stay tuned for updates on them. But moving on, let's now head over to the strawberries to transplant them to a new location. And the reason why I'm doing this is simply because as these trees around the strawberries fill in, they really start to get shaded out. So all that we're gonna do is move them to a new location. All right, I'm not gonna lie, I am cautiously optimistic about this spot, this setup for the strawberries here. So we'll see how we do. And as you can tell, I'm getting more and more into the garden. And so one of the questions that's coming up is irrigation. And what I wanna do is take you over to a little irrigation experiment that I just ran to try and figure out the best option for this season. So over the last few years, I've tried a whole bunch of different irrigation options, trying to figure out what would be the best for my garden. I started with hand watering, which obviously is effective, but super inefficient from a time perspective. You can't go on vacation, anything along those lines. So it obviously wasn't going to be a good long-term solution. Next up, I set up a DIY irrigation system that had sprayers or bubblers at the end of it. And to be honest, this has been my favorite option so far, but the downside to it is that it's fairly inefficient because there's lots of overspray and water going into areas that you don't necessarily need to be watering. So last year, I started experimenting with these 1/4 inch drip lines in my garden, and I was really hopeful that they were going to work, but I didn't really get the results that I was looking for. It just didn't seem like enough water was getting to the plants. So through the off season, I did some research, and the kind of last option that I found were a set of 1 gallon and 2 gallon drip emitters that you can punch into an irrigation line. So just the other day, I picked some up to start experimenting with them. And the experiment that I ran was I took each of the different watering options, a 1 gallon drip emitter, a 2 gallon drip emitter, a bubbler, and the 1/4 inch drip line. And I put each of them into a big measuring cup and then turned the water on to actually see how much water they let out over the course of a 15-minute period. And as we can see, the bubbler gave out the most because you can really turn it on to spray a lot of water at once, which is probably why I've enjoyed it and found it really effective. But what was super interesting was that the 1/4 inch drip line was actually giving out a very similar amount of water to the 1 gallon emitter and the 2 gallon emitters. So to further experiment with that, I ran an irrigation line down the middle of my bed with 2 gallon emitters punched into the irrigation line every 12 inches. And then right beside it, I ran the 1/4 inch drip line, which has the small little emitters on it every 6 inches. And what I found was that after about 45 minutes or so, the 1/4 inch drip line actually fully saturated the entirety of the line, versus the 2 gallon emitters only saturated the area directly where they were. And so I think the issue that I was experiencing last year was that I just didn't have them on for long enough. I had them on a 20-minute cycle, which was fine for the bubblers, but not nearly enough time for a drip line like this. So over the coming weeks, I'm gonna set up all of my garden beds so that I can plug and play whichever option that I'd like. And I'm gonna start with the 1/4 inch drip line to see how it does this season. So it's gonna be another one that you're gonna wanna stay tuned for to see how it does. Now to wrap up for today, let's head over to my blueberry plant up at the front to get all prepped for the spring. And as I prep the blueberries here, I wanted to take a moment to invite you to my online gardening mentorship, Grounded. See, I know it can be a little bit daunting and overwhelming to start gardening because there's so much to learn, and that's the opposite of how gardening should feel, which is exactly why I created Grounded. As a mentee, I'm gonna work directly with you and guide you through the entirety of the gardening season. We have a live call every single week where I either teach or do office hours. There's on-demand video growing guides and a private community where you can interact with myself and other like-minded gardeners. My promise to you is that by the end of the season, you'll be a competent and confident gardener, and it'll become a practice that brings you so much peace, joy, and restoration. And so if that's of interest to you, simply head to the link in the description of this video to book a one-on-one enrollment call with me, and let's get you growing this season. Whew. Perfect timing as the sun just dipped behind the mountains there. That was a full day of gardening. Thanks so much for coming along with me. As mentioned, check out the transplant kit and Grounded down in the description of this video. Both of the links are in there. And other than that, that's everything for today. So I'll catch you on the next Soil Saturday. See you then.